People who have conducted job interviews, what's something someone said did that made you instantly decide not to hire them? Story 1. Smirked and sounded snotty and entitled immediately after greeting me and me asking them to be seated. Bye, you thought I was the assistant, but guess what? I would have been your boss. Answer. My wife was the boss at her job and met this guy at a random party, got to talking, and he realized he wanted to get hired there. They were all drinking and having fun. He asked how to get hired. Wife tells him we're hiring. Send me your resume. He said okay, but he'll send it directly to the manager. Who's that? Wife says he'll handle it. She's setting him up now. He still doesn't get it and asks again who to send it to. She's not mad because this guy would be a good fit, had the credentials, and he was very funny. But she wanted to have a little fun, so she finally leans in a bit and says, I'm the fudge boss. She was grinning. He was rightfully embarrassed, but she was nice about it. She hired him, and he was a fine subordinate. Part of his job was to fetch her lunch. Story 2. Nothing wild, but the position was advertised as a 100 travel. As in they would be all over the country on Friday. First question I asked was, so you are okay with that amount of travel? Guy says, yeah, as long as I'm home by 5 o'clock every night to give his dad medication. Quickest interview ever. Story 3. In our interviews for entry-level construction jobs, we ask a stereotypical ethics question. Basically, if you saw someone on site steal an expensive tool and put it in their car, what would you do? Everyone knows to say something like, I would let a supervisor know, or I would try and stop them. One guy I interviewed said verbatim, I ain't no snitch. I respected the honesty, but also stopped the interview right there. Story 4. I was interviewing a guy for a job in a chemical plant. I looked over his resume and saw where he had worked at several plants in less than 18 months. Before I said anything, he commented, as you can see, I have worked at naming the last 2 plants, and followed up with, those big plants are more concerned about safety than getting the product out. My direct manager stood up, said we had his resume, and thanked him for coming in. Resume went straight to the trash. Story 5. The person was literally running every question through an AI and reading the output to me via Zoom. Story 6. Used to take new hire cab drivers out to show them the ropes and assess them. Young guy, 21 or 22, was brought in by his mother, which was odd, but maybe not that odd. Seemed okay at first, but as I'm talking to him, I notice he's not actually answering any questions you ask him. He responds, says a few things somewhat related, so it kind of sounds like he's talking about what you're asking about, but it's incomplete and indirect. I kept imagining him trying to work through a sensitive situation where communication is key. When I got back, I wrote about it on his review sheet and gave it to the shift lead. A few days later, he told me they didn't hire him. Background check came back. Kid had just spent 6 months in hospital for schizophrenia and had some anger violence issues on his rap sheet. Story 7. Me. Why do you want to move into a leadership position? Them. The power. I thanked them for the transparency and told them it wasn't a fit right there. It was an internal opening too, so it was a bit of a career pathing ended for them. Edit. I did ask a follow-up question about that, and it's strictly related to the ability to hire and fire for any reason, which was widely known to be a committee activity, hiring, or above their desired management level, discipline, nor how we treated our team, as that would be a horrible place to work. Story 8. Had a candidate decide not to wait in the lobby as instructed, but to waltz past the front desk, a separate issue that this was possible, and wander the floor until she found the conference room where the panel was prepping. She proceeded to make several snarky comments about how hard we were to find. She wasn't a good fit for several reasons, but the first impression alone was hard to get past. Story 9. I worked in a restaurant, and I had to walk out a problematic dishwasher who gave attitude to servers and would disappear for hours, so we fired him. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm at a different restaurant working with another colleague from the previous one. The kitchen manager come back and says, do you know this guy? He's applying here and his resume has the same restaurant you were at. I said, yep. Don't hire him. He'll give you headaches. The manager says, did you want to come out and tell him no? I said, sure. I walked out into the dining room, saw the guy. He sees me and turns white as a ghost. I laugh and said, hell no, and walked to the back. Kick rocks, Jeremy. Story 10. I was looking to add to my team. One candidate told me he'd have my job within a year because he'd asked my boss to play golf and push me out. Real team player there. He didn't get the job. Story 11. I was the receptionist, not the hiring manager. I told HR I had a funny feeling about the guy she had just interviewed. I couldn't explain it. He just didn't feel right. They hired him. Everyone loved him. Salesman, wife fighting cancer, would give you the shirt off his back. I felt like a heel. Then the police show up and want to talk with HR. The hire was taken out in handcuffs. He had embezzled from his last job. He didn't even have a wife. HR told me if I ever had one of those feelings after she had seen an applicant to tell her. It never happened again while I was employed there. Story 12. Brought their parents to sit in on the interview to make sure I am fair in my decision-making process. Answer. Ugh. I had a classmate in grad school whose mother would accompany him to class. This wasn't an overachieving adolescent. The guy had to be at least 25. He was an intelligent guy on some level, but had lots of psychological baggage from being steeped in learned helplessness by his mom. After he pestered me for the answer to a 7th grade math question, and later stood behind me to learn how to load PCR tubes, something he should have already been doing routinely, I ratted him out to his major advisor. Maybe that was mean, but when you have to tell an adult with a BS to not interrupt you while you're setting up 192 separate reactions at the bench, something has to be done. This was about the same time that his students, yes, he was a TA, completely revolted against his incompetent attempts at teaching. He was bounced from the program soon afterwards. I still feel a little sorry for him, but there was no way he was going to function on his own in a lab or in front of a classroom. I hope he found something to do that was within his capabilities. It's definitely a first for me to see someone bring their parents to a professional job interview. While having a support system is great, part of being a professional is demonstrating independence and the ability to handle high-pressure situations on your own. If you can't navigate a simple conversation without your parents there to ensure fairness, it raises some serious questions about how you'd handle the day-to-day challenges of the job. Story 13. Hiring for a clerk position in a pharmacy. Lady couldn't place a series of 10 names in alphabetical order. We had to start testing new hires because we find out one of our current employees couldn't do it and would just hang patient scripts wherever our students. Story 14. I was head of maintenance for a school district and we were interviewing for my assistant. I forget the exact question, but it had to do with obvious duties expected of maintenance personnel. When asked, they looked at me, pointed their finger and said, "That's your job." Wrong answer, my dude. And don't point your darn finger at me. Story 15. Unable to admit they don't know something, especially if they say a bunch of silly stuff to try to cover it up. Inability to clearly communicate their thought. Rudeness, lack of empathy, superiority, complex, clearly using an AI chatbot to do the interview. Story 16. Guy's cell phone rang 3 separate times during the interview. He chuckled and half apologized, but for whatever reason chose not to turn it off. Then later in the week, he had the nerve to call the office in rage that he got a letter thanking him for coming in, but declining him for the position. Answer. I had a candidate take the call during our interview. She told me at the top of the interview that she had a break-in, called the police, and was expecting them. I tried to reschedule, but she said she would prefer to do the interview at that time. 5 minutes into the interview, her phone rang and she said, "Excuse me, I have to take this," and answered. It was a quick call, so I thought it was over. Then maybe 10 minutes later, her doorbell rings and she says, "Excuse me," picks up her laptop with her video still on and goes to the door to talk to the police. She muted her laptop, so I have no idea what was said, but I just hung up. Story 17. Simple question, requiring simple answer. 40 minutes later, after multiple hints that there might be a simpler way to do this. 2 whiteboards full of a ridiculously complex system that would fail in many cases. Aggressive arguing that there was no simpler way and that I didn't understand the complexities of my question. He must have been a friend of someone because my boss tried to convince me that I should give him a second chance, that I should interview him again. I told him that he was free to hire him, that a personal recommendation obviously carried more weight than my 45 minutes, but that I felt that even if his second attempt was perfect, that we had other candidates that didn't require 2 attempts. He grumbled, walked away, and later told me that I was right. He didn't get hired. And it really was a simple question. Story 18. I asked someone to tell me about an interesting project you worked on and what you learned from it. They then went on a 5-minute rant about how their last job didn't give them any good projects, that it's unfair to expect them to succeed when they don't give them good things to work on, etc. I think she actually started yelling towards the end of her rant. I ended the interview shortly after that. Story 19. I got to his personal email to reply with job offers, and it was something like bluntmaster69@hotmail. Hard pass. Story 20. In a behavioral interview assessing leadership skills, etc. Clavon, did you enjoy having an intern? 8. Oh, yes, I was able to offload lots of work to him. Not a word about mentoring, collaborating, etc. Story 21. Described former colleagues as meanie within 15 minutes of interview starting. I ended it immediately. Story 22. I asked her about a time that she saw a project to completion. She told us my assistant manager was in on the interview with me about how in high school she wrote a 10-minute play that her classmates then put on with her directing, but that my assistant and I wouldn't understand about because we probably aren't interested in the arts because we were men. In high school, my assistant manager was a band nerd and also painted the picture that hung on our wall. In high school, I was also a band nerd in high school, in addition to being a drama geek. I also wrote a 10-minute play that my classmates then put on. I also happened to be a season ticket holder to 2 different theater companies on our city. Not only did she not get hired, you probably aren't interested in the arts, became a running joke around the office, especially because the person we did hire is an actor. Story 23. Work in healthcare analytics. Mid-interview, it was virtual as they were from another region. They shared screen to demonstrate the type of work they were currently doing, which we did not ask for, and she did not ask us if she could share screen. And the screen she showed us had clear patient identifiers, health card numbers, etc. We immediately shut that shoot down. Patient privacy and data security are absolutely paramount, and that level of cavalier treatment of sensitive patient information immediately disqualified her from being considered, and we had to submit a report to their institution afterwards. Story 24. This is not an outright reason to not hire someone, but people talking about their involvement in their church. I've done tons of interviews where people use their experience being involved and having faith as a selling point. The only ones that were worth hiring were the ones that had actual relatable experience. Talking about being a deacon or running a fellowship group doesn't do a lot, but talking about organizing groups of people for annual events and organizing, helping with the church's finances, budgeting, paying bills, fundraising, and developing public speaking skills in front of large groups is more applicable. Story 25. I once had someone tell me, well, my goal is to be in charge and run the place. So if I see a leadership opportunity, I take it. If I think management is weak, I'll step in and step up to the plate. It's my turn, you know? I don't like a weak manager, and I'm more than willing to take over if necessary. I didn't need someone who would be gunning for my job, undermining me, and attempting a management coup. I needed someone who was going to focus on the work at hand and do their job as directed. I also had someone once apply for a weekend position, then tell me they couldn't work weekends due to religious reasons. So their solution was to hire them for a weekday position, then transfer a weekday employee to the weekends. And if I didn't do that, it was religious discrimination, and she'd sue us. Because threatening to sue the hiring manager during the job interview is totally going to get you the position. There is a very fine line between being ambitious and being a literal threat to the office hierarchy. Bringing up a management coup or threatening legal action before you've even been hired is a massive red flag for any employer. It's important to advocate for yourself, but doing so in a way that creates immediate conflict usually ensures the interview ends right then and there. Story 26. Interviewing for an IT position, asked a basic question about virus removal. Oh, I don't know, my husband does that. Well, then tell him to apply. Answer. Hiring developers for a creative agency here in NYC 10 years ago. They had just graduated from Columbia or NYU. I forget which one. I was excited to interview him as I really needed the extra staff. On his resume in the About Me section at the top, he mentioned he enjoys writing semantic code. I said, that's great. What does semantic mean from a software coding perspective? His response, I don't know. I just added it to my resume. I explained what it meant and then thanked him for his time. He didn't get the job. Story 27. I was hiring for a full-time computer-aided drafting position at a construction firm. The interviewee said, I can't imagine staring at a computer screen for 8 hours a day. I said, well, that's great because we do it for 9 or 10 hours a day. She thought I was joking. Story 28. Was honest about her credit card fraud in the past. We run a clinic where there's tons of patient data she could steal. We listen and we don't judge, but I judge to protect my patients. Story 29. Had a candidate show up in a crop top leggings and told me she would only accept 30 HR when our listing stated 22, 26 or DOE. I gave her a coaching on professionalism and wished her the best. Story 30. A girl told us she was leaving her previous job because there was a demon there that would attack her, but not the other employees. Story 31. What is your policy on fighting? It was their first question as we walking into the building brought them over to our satellite building from the main one. Story 32. We wrote on their resume that they had 2 degrees, computer science and political science. Asked how they found that split to work out, and they admitted they had only briefly been in the computer science program and was failing, so they switched after 1 semester. I could see it being an honest mistake for a very junior person, but that is a critical lack of common sense. Story 33. Customer service job. Guy said he didn't like dealing with customers. Then proceeded to talk shoot about a customer he dealt with at a previous job. Answer, so I have run customer service support teams for 20 years, and I absolutely dislike people. My teams will seriously have a private shoot towel Slack channel for venting. But that's private. And seriously, the single biggest thing I look for hiring people is, no matter how big of a misanthrope you are, can you seriously ask yourself what you would want to happen if you were on the other side of the call? I'm all about hiring the haters. They just need to dislike corporate BS more than customers. Story 34. Candidate kept boasting about how many languages he speaks, even though it was not a requirement for the position. Finally asked him in which foreign language he was most fluent, and he replied Spanish. Followed up with a simple question asked in Spanish. He did not speak Spanish. Answer. I had the opposite. I was being interviewed by a guy. He saw I had listed Dutch as a foreign language. It's my mother tongue. He scoffed and asked if I really spoke Dutch. I said yes. He asked me to say something in Dutch. I asked if he spoke Dutch. He said did not speak Dutch. Me. So how will you know if I'm actually speaking Dutch? Him. Oh, I'll know. So I said a sentence in Danish. He goes, yep, that's Dutch all right. I did not pursue that job further. Story 35. It was a part-time position and the hours were pretty flexible. We honestly got a lot of retired people. Did a phone interview with a guy, and he started off by saying that the pay wasn't really worth his time. His time was valuable. In fact, this interview wasn't even worth his time. You'd think that would be the end of the interview, but the guy just would not get off the phone. He kept going on and on about how his time was valuable. He would not let us get in a word to shut down the interview. We had to be polite and not just hang up. His time was so valuable that he lectured us for a half hour on the subject. Story 36. When I reiterated a statement the interviewee made, she mocked me and repeated what I said like she was a 5-year-old. She even bobbed her head back and forth and made that mocking face that kids make when they tease each other. We were all shocked but cracked up after she left. It was crazy. Story 37. I was fired from my last job because my boss said I embezzled $20,000. That isn't true, though. It was really only $10,000. Story 38. The question was the standard. What makes you want to come work with us at XYZ? His answer started out fine, looking for a fresh start, a new challenge, etc. But then it somehow devolved into a several-minute rant about how his soon-to-be ex-wife was divorcing him and how she was raking him over the coals and screwing him over. My manager and I just sat there dumbfounded and wrapped the interview up shortly after. Story 39. He told me straight up that he only wanted this job as a way to get into the studio so that he could have my job. I did not hire him as my assistant, not because I was threatened, but because there's no point in hiring an assistant whose only goal is to leave that role as soon as possible. At least pretend you want to do the actual job I'm hiring you for. Story 40. Bad-mouthing prior employers. Being late, lack of accountability, not properly dressed for an interview. Story 41. I'm not good enough. I'd like to end the interview. I told them that it was just nerves and everything would be okay and we can continue and see where the discussion goes. But they were adamant that they were overwhelmed and wanted to end the interview, so we did poor last. Answer. I had an accounting finance interview where they said, okay, we're going to do a little quiz. We're going to ask where you would find these numbers on specific tax forms and tell us the box number. I said bluntly, I am no going to do good at this. I have my experience, but I don't know the specific boxes of these forms. No, you'll be fine. All right, I think got maybe 2, right? Aside from that, it was solid interview on my part. After the test was done, I was like, told you so didn't get the job, LOL. Story 42. Had a very smart young lady from an Ivy League school tell me that she just wanted the job because it was in her desired state and that she's probably move on within a year. I thanked her due her candor and hired someone else. Story 43. When asked about how he had handled issues with managers in the past, he started by describing the age, ethnicity, and weight of his manager. Beyond irrelevant, that's going to be a no. Story 44. I work HR for a construction company. Guy shows up with beer breath for the interview. Did you drink beer before getting here? Yeah, I was a bit nervous, but it was just 3 cans. You do know you're here for a dump truck driver position, right? So, story 45. We were hiring for an illustrator at a crafting company. He had a nice portfolio and he could clearly draw, but it was all in his own style. When he was asked if he would be able to shift gears and match other styles, he said, "I won't need to because I am so good at my style." We explained that he would have to draw additional assets to match existing illustration styles pretty regularly, and he just snorted and said, "No, they will have to match my style." He was not hired. Story 46. I worked at a small ad agency that had a niche with car dealers. It was an art director designer job. He straight up said to the creative director and myself, "Well, I'm sure the work sucks, but I'll take the job to get experience." This was a first interview and we never gave him any indication he was hired on the spot. He seemed to think we hired him then and there. Story 47. His phone rang in the middle of the interview, which, not cool, mute that. But then he answered it and gave me the hang on a sec finger, then said nothing. How about you? I just left the room and asked the admin to show him out. Story 48. I don't like people. Just put me in an office and leave me alone for a job helping people at the library. Story 49. I was the admin assistant. The girl came in for the interview. She was a half hour early. I said she could wait in the lobby. She was so insistent that her interview time was now. It was not. I double-checked the schedule and the emails invite I had sent out to her. I told her, hey, better early than late. I told my boss afterwards because she had been so rude to me and blamed me for being early. He didn't hire her. Answer, I wasn't the one interviewing, but I was an employee at a small workplace. We really didn't have any place to wait for the interview. A woman who was being interviewed showed up early and we told her, just wait here by the entrance and the owner will come get you when they are ready. She waited 2 minutes, then physically moved the gate to the entry and just walked in. She didn't get the job. Story 50. Showed up in pajamas. Showed up with their parent. I did interviews for years and I've seen some pretty unbelievable stuff. Story 51. Told about how he stole goods from a store they worked at, put them in his buddy's car, called the cops so his buddy would get arrested, then slept with his buddy's girlfriend while the buddy was in jail. All this in response to the question, tell us about a time when you had an ethical dilemma. What did you do and what was the outcome? Apparently his buddies was cheating him on their shared substances business, and so he told us what he did when his best friend wasn't splitting the profits 50-50. Story 52. I don't have anything as funny as what I've been reading, but in my experience, if you are late to the digital video interview that you picked the time for, I do not hire you. I have just sat there in Google Meet lobbies just waiting. I exit 19 minutes in and move them to the no column immediately. Story 53. Been on the other side, I had the lead interviewer raise his voice to me when he didn't understand what I was conveying. I don't mean he just got louder, he was basically shouting at me. I looked at the other interviewer and he looked all sheepish, which told me that this is the lead interviewer's personality and it would be exponentially worse if I actually worked for him. I finished the interview and made a point of letting the company know I was withdrawing my application. I had other options at the time. Years later, I got confirmation from someone who worked there that the guy was toxic and scared away staff all the time. Like the saying goes, when they show you who they are, believe them. Story 54. I interviewed a guy years ago. We asked him to tell us about a disagreement he had with someone and how they worked it out. He told us about a roofing job where him and another guy were arguing on the roof. He threw the other guy off the roof, got fired from the battalion, and arrested. We decided probably not a good idea to hire him. Side note, we had another person answer the question by telling us about how he believes in mermaids, and his mom didn't. I hired him on the spot because he sounded awesome to have around. Fast forward a few weeks, and we found him huffing paint. Good times. Story 55. I worked on a college campus. We interviewed a woman who, when asked why she wanted the job, said she had friends who worked in our building, and it would be more convenient to go to lunch with them if she also worked in the building. We actually circled back to that question to give her an opportunity to come up with something else, but she said the same thing. We hired someone else. Story 56. Introductory phone call to see if we wanted to bring him in for an interview. I had a set of standard questions I asked on the phone before we brought them in. Asked if he could pass a substances test. He said, absolutely, just let me know when it is, and I'll make sure I can pass it for you. Asked if he had a valid driver's license. He replied no, but he could still drive for us if we needed him to. I told him we always run background checks on new hires. Is anything going to come back on that background check that I should know about? He says that unfortunately he had some felonies about 5 years ago, But thankfully, it's only been misdemeanors since then. He was not the candidate we were looking for. Story 57. I asked them if they had any areas that need improvement or development, and what steps are they taking to improve them. Their response, I don't have any weaknesses. In my head, it was over then. I can't manage someone that thinks they have it all. At least make shoot up. Answer. At one of my first jobs straight out of college, I was interviewing with the whole team simultaneously, 5 people, and they asked me to list my 3 biggest weaknesses. I can't remember what I answered for the first 2, but then I said, and I can't think of a 3rd weakness, which I thought was going to ruin the interview for me, but apparently everyone found it unintentionally hilarious that my 3rd weakness is the inability to think of a 3rd weakness. I think that ended up lightening the mood a bit and made me feel much less nervous. So the rest of the interview went much smoother, and I ended up getting the job. Story 58. I wasn't conducting the interview, but I was sitting in the waiting area when this happened, so I got to watch the whole thing unfold. This guy walks in for his interview, and he's on his phone, not like wrapping up a call in the parking lot, actively having a full conversation as he walks through the door. The receptionist greets him. He holds up one finger in that "give me a minute" gesture and just keeps talking. She's standing there with the clipboard, trying to be professional, and he's discussing what sounds like weekend plans with someone. Finally, and I mean a solid 3 minutes later, he ends the call. Doesn't apologize, just says, I'm here for the 2 o'clock. She takes his name, asks him to have a seat, and goes to let the hiring manager know he's arrived. The guy sits down across from me, pulls out his phone again, and I kid you not, he's playing a mobile game with the sound on. Not loud, but audible, in a quiet waiting room. About 5 minutes later, the hiring manager comes out. Professional guy extends his hand for a handshake. The candidate looks up from his phone, sees the outstretched hand, and says, I will never forget this. Oh, can you give me like 2 minutes? I'm almost done with this level. The hiring manager just stood there. You could see him processing whether this was actually happening. Then he slowly lowered his hand, said, actually, I think we're all set here, turned around and walked back to his office. The candidate finally looked up from his phone, confused, and asked the receptionist, wait, was that the interview? She just smiled and said, yes, it was. He sat there for another minute looking genuinely baffled before he packed up and left. The receptionist and I made eye contact after he was gone, and we both just started laughing. Some people really do interview themselves right out of a job. The level of transparency some people have in interviews is truly mind-blowing. Admitting to physical altercations with previous management might be honest, but it definitely doesn't help your case for being a team player. It's one of those situations where you just have to wonder what they expected the outcome to be after sharing something like that. Story 59. To be honest, this only made me want to hire her more, but I was overruled by the other interviewers. Me, what would you consider your greatest weakness? Her, oh, I eat way too many pickles. Me, girl, same, that's not really what I meant though. Her, I don't work out as much as I should. The job was for a data management visualization role. Story 60. Showed up at 11:40 when the scheduled time was 10:30, confirmed via phone call and text, was wearing jeans and an untucked button-down tee. When I told him he was late, he said, I thought it was at 11:30, to which I replied, so you'd still be late? And asked him to leave. Then he threw a fit for me not giving him a chance. The guy who showed up on time and was well-dressed became a personal friend of mine and replaced me when I left my position there, and is still running that place 8 years later to great success. Story 61. We were interviewing for a kindergarten position, and we asked this guy why he wanted to be a teacher. He said because it was easy, and all you had to do was teach them the ABC song. I was the kinder teacher on the panel and just laughed. Same school, different position. A woman said she would lock kids out of the room and demand the parents come deal with them. Ma'am, it simply doesn't work that way. And my favorite, a woman started the interview by telling us she could only work from 9-1 MWF. This was for the assistant principal position, which is more than full-time most days. Story 62. Candidate looks at watch, asks, how long is this going to take? I say, I have great news. You can leave now. Fastest interview ever. It really did happen. Story 63. I was interviewing for a new design team member back when you were expected to bring a physical portfolio of your previous work to show. Dude brought a sketchbook full of strippers on poles. Not even good ones. No shading, no color, no depth of field. Just a book full of janky, jerk, naked stick women. Story 64. Had a guy applying for a bartending position. I asked him to tell me how to make a margarita. He couldn't tell me. He was coming from a local restaurant that specializes in craft margaritas. This isn't the only example, but it's extremely obvious when people are lying about their bartending experience. Even if you manage to make it through the interview and get hired, it gets real obvious real quick, especially in a high-volume bar. Story 65. I left my last job because they said I was the primary suspect in 20,000 going missing at Toys R Us. I didn't mind leaving because they worked me like a Hebrew slave. Story 66. Asking a fairly introductory question, and they proceed to pretend like their video froze as you can clearly hear someone else telling them the answer to what we asked the actual candidate. Story 67. I was interviewing a senior from a top-rated public university over the phone. This would be her first professional position after graduation for the Fortune 10 company I worked for. Literally every question I asked her, the answer began with, well, my mom said. Me, what do you know about our corporation? Her, well, my mom said that you're one of the top companies. Me, what are some of your strengths that you would bring to this position? Her, well, my mom said I should talk about how maybe her mom should have applied. I might have hired her. Story 68. He asked for 8 weeks off. He travels all summer for festivals, you see. In the first 5 minutes, and it went downhill from there. Another one kept taking family calls because she was late to drive her daughter to college, and they left without her. The man who came in wearing thong flip-flops, with filthy feet and rotten-looking toes, shorts and a dirty old rock band shirt. The kid who said he can only work 11 to 7 a.m., and it was a retail job with 10 to 6 hours. I can go on. Story 69. He was a couple minutes late for an online interview. Forgivable, depending on the situation. First words were, I'm so sorry for being late. Thank you for your patience. I had to complete this stupid training thing. Another stupid, unnecessary requirement from headquarters. I worked at HQ. He was interviewing for a position at HQ. Story 70. Worked in HR at a call center. Dude shows up, and while we're walking to the interview room, he looks around and says, lots of nice tail work in here. Story 71. Kios. Tell me about a time you failed. What did you learn from it? Aimbo. I can't think of a time I failed. Can I tell you about a time my team failed? Did not move the candidate forward because the answer showed a complete lack of humility, self-awareness. Answer, I helped a friend craft responses to written interview questions. The first was about a time you received feedback and how you processed it. She told me, this is a trick to see how often I get criticized. I told her, no, you're 27, and they have all been working in this field since you were in kindergarten and have much to teach you, and they want to make sure you're not a non-receptive know-it-all. She came up with a great example that reflected well on her and got the job. Story 72. My 2IC and I were interviewing for a summer position, and a guy had a decent interview. He probably would have had an offer. The line supervisor was greeting candidates. After every interview, we asked her if she had any input. This guy, he was staring at my boobs, so I asked him to stop. He didn't. We disqualified him right then. Story 73. Got asked a pretty standard question. Responded aggressively, telling us it was the wrong question. We tried to give him some grace, and he doubled down on the aggression, just short of calling us idiots. Yeah, dude, that's going to be a no for me. If you don't take the lifeline you're telling me, this isn't a one-off, and I'm just going to have to deal with you as you are every day. Instead, I could just not do that. Answer, I never had that, but a different interviewer on a team I worked for once asked a candidate a fairly straightforward coding question, and the guy refused to do it because it wasn't challenging enough. They went back and forth for a second, and he comes out with, if you aren't going to ask me anything harder than this, then I guess this interview is over. The interviewer replied, I guess it is, and walked him out. Story 74. Said females repeatedly, and then proceeded to try to recite the criminal code in reference to several questions. And when he was explicitly misinformed on several offenses, he doubled down and attempted to correct both myself and the other interviewer, citing our lack of real experience as the reason for our supposed errors. Story 75. I was a part of an entry-level firefighter process a few years ago for my department. This was for folks who would undergo a 20-week training before getting placed on an engine to start their first year. Our department is also adjacent to multiple ski resorts, one of which is serviced by one of our stations. Had a young man, maybe 19, sit down for his interview. We asked about his interest in our department, and he answered that he thought it was so cool that we are just so close to skiing and could hit the slopes right after work. We asked why he was interested in being a firefighter, and again, talked about his stoke for having such great access to skiing and having 4 days off for skiing. We asked a few more questions and then spent the remainder of his time talking about our favorite places and trails to ski. He was not hired. Story 76. 1. Zoom interview. She was wearing lacy pajamas and the matching silk robe. 2. Many Zoom interviews, unable to connect their camera or sound. Since we work hybrid or remote, it isn't a good sign if someone can't work Zoom. 3. Multiple Zoom interviews, didn't have their phone propped somewhere and instead kept fidgeting with it or holding it. I feel like I am interviewing the Blair Witch Project. 4. Have had people interview for positions and tell me their least favorite function at their current job is the main function of the position they are interviewing for. I start every interview by telling them about the position and go into detail about the day-to-day job. There is no way they could be confused about what duties they would be responsible for. Story 77. Hiring a nurse for a senior living facility. She came in for an interview and I saw her park in the first handicap spot next to the building I could see from my office. She had no disability placard or license plate. When she entered my office, I pointed out that she must have forgot to put her placard up and she should go do it so she doesn't get a ticket. She responded that she forgot that she doesn't have it today because her mom took it back to run her errands. I asked why her mom was using her handicap placard, and she said, "No, I don't have my own. I just usually use my mom's because I dislike looking for parking." It was an immediate no from me, dog. Story 78. I have a name that can be shortened. I do not like the shortened version, so I always introduce myself by my full name and correct people if they decide to shorten it. This man decided to use the shortened version of my name throughout the interview. I corrected him multiple times, and other people in the room noticed I was getting more and more angry each time. Story 79. This wasn't a great applicant to begin with. Nail in the coffin was at the end. She asked me to not contact her current manager for a reference, with the reason that the manager was new to her role and wouldn't be able to properly speak to this applicant's practice performance. Thing is that her current manager was a friend of mine who I knew had been in that role for several years. So it was clear she knew she'd get a terrible reference and just made up a weird lie about it. Story 80. Had a woman come in and started going through everything wrong with the co-workers at her previous place of employment. All of them, far as I could tell. As she left, I advised her not to do that on her next interview, and she seemed to get it. Story 81. Midway through an interview which had been going quite well, I asked a question about how the candidate would manage competing needs of people in the office they would need to be managing. They launched into a diatribe about how it was their way or the highway, and people tended to learn very quickly to do what they said and not to complain. It was such a left field comment compared to everything they'd said so far, and absolutely not in line with the culture or the ethos of the organization, which was very apparent on even a cursory search. Really made me wonder if they thought they could just pretend to be the right fit, and what they thought the job would be like in reality. I assume they thought they could manipulate everyone around them. Story 82. I'm an attorney and was tasked to interview for a paralegal role at the firm I was in. A lady came in with an impressive resume. After we got conversational, she started bragging about how at her last job, she would pretend to be a lawyer and would speak at hearings. That's not okay. Like lose your license as the supervising attorney level of not okay. My jaw dropped and I played it cool while wrapping up the interview as soon as possible. Story 83. I interviewed a gal and it seemed to be going well. She had been laid off from her previous job and was honest about applying to a couple different companies as she really needed a job. I asked her if we offered her a job and another company did too, how would she decide which job to accept? She put her hands in the air and made a sweeping motion toward her body and said, "A spirit will come down and enter my body and tell me what to do." She then closed her eyes and took several deep breaths before she opened them again. I just sat there for a few seconds, then thanked her for coming in and walked her out. Story 84. I worked at a big box retailer and got called up to the service counter to deal with a customer who was upset. This was only a couple minutes before I was scheduled to conduct an interview with a potential new hire. I get up there and this woman is berating the employee behind the counter, referring to her as this meanie, etc. I ask her to lower her voice and please stop being disrespectful to my employee. She isn't happy, but she does eventually calm down enough to be reasonable, and we resolve the situation at the service desk. I turn to walk away, thinking we're done here, and she goes, "Anyway, I'm here for my interview." I can't believe that this is actually happening. It seems like awful rom-com movie type shoot, but this rude jerk woman actually expected me to proceed with interviewing her. I'm sorry, Mom, that position is no longer available. Multitasking is a valuable skill, but there is a time and a place for everything, and eating a full meal during an interview is definitely not it. It's hard to take a candidate seriously when they seem more interested in their lunch than the position they are applying for. Professionalism starts with the basics, and that includes giving the interviewer your undivided attention. Story 85. If you feel like your employer's not paying you enough, I think it's totally fine to steal from them. If they don't want you stealing from them, then they ought to pay you more, right? How much money would be enough? I don't know. I guess we'd have to see. Would I report someone else for stealing from the company? Hell no. I'm not a darn narc. Yeah, cool, no. I don't think we'll be doing a second interview there, Ace. Nope. Story 86. I called someone for a scheduled initial phone interview. I woke him up at 2 p.m. and asked him to tell me a bit about himself and why he was interested in this job. Response was, I don't know. What do you want to hear? Thanked him for applying and hung up. Answer. I had the same thing happen. After being pretty sure I woke him up at our scheduled phone screen time for an IT position, I asked if he had a chance to look at our website that I had emailed to him. He said, oh, should I have done that? I told him very gently that would have been a good idea. I then asked one more polite question before ending the call, and then probably let him go back to sleep. People, I do not recommend getting high the night before you have an interview. Story 87. I had a lady come in who was a friend of the family of one of our young managers. She was a hairdresser applying for a dog grooming position, which she had no experience for. She waltzed into the store and basically insisted on having an interview right away, even though we never even saw an application resume from her and had not scheduled an interview. She wouldn't back down, so I interviewed her pretty quickly, and I told her she wouldn't be a good fit. The young manager was my friend and was super embarrassed that this lady was so pushy and basically tried to leverage I've no ex since she was a baby in a professional workplace. Never seen anything like that before or since, haha. Story 88. When they, 1, describe a group of people with contempt, could not differentiate between I did and my group did. Story 89. I was interviewing candidates for an entry-level developer job. I remember one guy had to consult his own resume to recall if he had taken Java in school. He failed very basic developer questions like, explain what branching is used for in code, or how can you control looping. He had gone to one of those unaccredited for-profit university systems. He did not get to the next round of interviews. I think I'll always remember him because he worked at the Walmart, and the very next day I happened to be behind him in line at a register while he was getting his break snack with a coworker. He clearly didn't recognize me and was talking to his coworker about how well his interview went and that he couldn't wait to start working for us. I really felt for the kid. He was on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars for a worthless degree that he got no actual skills or knowledge from. Story 90. I had someone tell me that he looked up my Facebook, tell me he knows my father, and then asked me about mutual friends. The Facebook lookup isn't abnormal, but making it a series of questions in the interview absolutely is. It felt so invasive and icky. I locked my Facebook down after that and did not hire the guy. I couldn't even tell you if he was qualified for the job. Every time I asked him about his experience, he tried to steer the conversation back to people we knew in common. Story 91. I didn't conduct interviews, but I worked for a small company and did a variety of tasks. One of them included calling applicants and setting up interviews for warehouse delivery positions. I was astonished at how rude most of the people were. Complete lack of respect, entitled AF. Maybe I'm not the person who is hiring you, but I'm sure AF going to let that person know how they acted on the phone. Story 92. I see on your application you attended Central High School. My mother is a teacher there. Oh? Who is your mom? Mrs. Bronco. She teaches mathematics. Oh yeah, I know her. She's a meanie. Story 93. I was the second doing interviews for a lab position. A current employee with a chemistry degree from a local university did not know one end of the pH scale from the other. She had a BS. Answer. When my father showed me how to test the pH of a swimming pool, I read the instructions that came with a nifty chart of the pH scale. The range was 114, so I remembered it like this. The lower numbers corresponded with lower letter A for acid. Higher numbers corresponded with the higher letter B for base, with 7 halfway in between being neutral. I figured this out as a child reading the manual to a pool test kit. How can one get a BS in chemistry and not know this? Story 94. You said this was a remote job. Will you be able to see exactly what time I clock in and out every day? Yes. Yes, I will see that. Story 95. Me. So why are you interested in being our data analyst? Her. My mom worked for the government and said that I want a government job. Me. Do you have any experiences with relational databases? Her. I don't know. maybe. Like I said, it's a government job. I need benefits. We still went through with the interview because we had to. She scored a 4 out of 27 on the questions. Me, after the interview to the HR person on the panel, how the hell did she make the cert list? HR rep shrugs. It especially sucks in government hiring since we may have a ton of applicants for a specific position, but HR will only send us 5 or so names to interview. So dozens don't even get a shot because this person slipped through. Story 96. This was pre-COVID. Phone interview. Junior role at a public company. First call, no answer. Next call, 2 minutes later, he picks up, and it was very obvious my call woke him up. That was pretty much it, but the icing was his answer for weaknesses. He said punctuality. Story 97. Someone was watching their nephew due to a family thing, and her house wasn't equipped for kids, so please be patient. Toddler was all over the place, and she was doing her best to manage the situation. She knocked it out of the park, keeping on task and speaking nicely to him. She wasn't the most qualified, but the most human, and I hired her and don't regret it. She has paid back that choice many times, proving her demeanor was exactly as she demonstrated. Sorry, not a negative story, but a positive story. We talk about her interview from hell all the time and laugh. Story 98. I received a resume written in Sharpie once. I used to keep it in my desk drawer as an example what not to do. Story 99. I was the intern hiring manager and was instructed to hire the son of the boss friend, but the boss told me to put him through his paces, interview him, etc. When I called to schedule the interview at around 1 p.m., I clearly woke him up. I reminded him to bring his resume. This was pre-email days, and he said, "What's that?" He didn't show up for the interview. I was required to schedule another interview with him anyway. He didn't show up for that either. Thankfully, at that point, the boss's secretary stood up for me, and I didn't have to deal with him anymore. Story 100. When asked why they thought they were qualified for the job, they replied that they weren't, but it was okay because the position was not a career goal for them. They only needed it to pay bills while they found something else. It was a teaching position. Story 101. I can't really do the test unless I have ChatGPT open. It's scary that it happened several times too. Story 102. I once interviewed a flat earther who admitted in the interview within the first 10 min that the main reason he wanted to work in aviation was to be closer to airplanes so he could prove they were holograms, since clearly they shouldn't be able to fly since the earth is flat. To this day, I'm not sure if he was just trying to show someone, "Hey look, I'm applying for jobs, IDK, why they all say no," or he genuinely believed it. But either way, I let the interview go on for like an hour, and him just ran his little heart out. Ended up going in a different direction. Haha. Answer. I was working a tutoring job once, and we were only supposed to work with each person for about half an hour. But I let this woman talk for almost 2 hours because she had so many eccentric things to say about how humans were descended from trees and never meant to eat meat. Her evidence was that human embryos look like tree roots, and how she wanted to be an anthropology major, but didn't want to take anthropology classes because they wouldn't agree with her ideas about anthropology. She was also asking me to help with her homework while actively inputting the questions into AI right in front of me. Like I would start to answer her question and she'd be like, okay, while taking a photo of her question and just inputting what the AI said, and then asking me to help her with the next one before I finished with the previous one. Some people are just out here believing so hard that they are right without an ounce of evidence, Lom. Sometimes people get so focused on the perks or the rules of a workplace that they forget to actually show why they're the best person for the job. Asking highly specific or suspicious questions about internal policies right off the bat can often lead to more questions about your own motives. First impressions are everything, and focusing on the wrong things can derail an opportunity very quickly. Story 103. Me being at just the right age to not know teenage speak, had to interview an 18-year-old kid. Interview was a train wreck from the start, but he said yeet at one point. Curiosity got the best of me, and I was like, yeet? This dude picked up my pen and threw it across the room, then looked me dead in the eyes and said, yeet. I kind of respected him for that, but also, hell no. Answer. Okay, that one would have made me laugh. I used to interview for theme park ride custodial guest relations in both group interview and individual interview settings. I've interviewed many teenagers, but none that were that memorable. Most of it was stuff like not dressing up for the interview, which personally I could let slide. We needed a large number of people for the season, and as long as everything was else good, I could overlook it. Being fidgety, etc. Story 104. Not me, but my brother was doing an interview with a young applicant for a warehouse job. The applicant's only work experience on their application was a summer job at McDonald's. My brother is going through the interview questions, and one is, during your previous job experience, did you make any decisions that had a positive effect? Or something along those lines. The applicant answered that one day he was working and the weather forecast was for a snowstorm late morning. He said he told his manager that they should not make the normal amount of food for the lunch rush because of the weather. My brother said he was feeling good about the kid until he looked back at his resume and saw that he only worked for 3 months during the summer. The kid didn't get the job. Story 105. Did a Zoom interview and he was honestly Googling answers to my questions in real time. Question, typing, delay, click link, read, reply. It was the most brazen thing I've ever seen. Story 106. I interviewed a guy who brought his girlfriend into the interview room. This was for an office position. Story 107. I wasn't the one conducting, but I had a job interview for a driving position. Well, in the parking lot before the job interview, I accidentally rear-ended the manager's car. Safe to say I didn't get the job. Story 108. I had someone whose answer to every question was more or less, "They come to you every day and ask what to do." No, I'm not a babysitter. I need someone who can do a job. Story 109. This story was told to me by an HR manager. She was once interviewing candidates for an engineering position. At the time, she was pregnant and nearing her due date. She interviewed one man and had decided he would not be hired. But she ended the interview by asking him if he had anything he would like to add. His response was something like, "I never expected to be interviewed by a woman, and I certainly never expected to be interviewed by a pregnant woman." Story 110. So I run a nonprofit and our interviews are with people who want to do community service at the rescue. So not an employment interview. But I've had several people ask me to commit forgery and lie about their hours in exchange for money. That's a felony. Glad they have learned nothing from being on probation. Story 111. Guy in Adidas trousers, sweatshirt, and gold chain, spread leg, told us that he won't follow orders that are given by woman, to me, male, my boss, female, and her assistant, female. Yeah, sure. Story 112. Certainly not the craziest story in this thread, but crazy for me. Zoom interview. I asked them what research they did for my company. She sifted through her notes for literally 30 seconds of paper shuffling. Felt much longer. Then says, "I'm sorry, I'm interviewing so many places that I can't remember what you guys do. I just need this job. Wasn't going well before that. Nail in the coffin after that. Okay, thanks for your time. What questions do you have for me?" "None, I nailed this. I just left the Zoom after that." Story 113. I'm afraid of heights. I felt bad, but we needed Guy to work a commercial contract, and 95 of our work was on the ceiling or on a rooftop. I had to tell him no and why, and he was relieved. Story 114. At an interview for a tech startup, they asked me, "If you could be any animal, what would you be?" I answered otter because, fun, active, work well with their hands, and cute as fuck. They really debated whether or not to hire me because of that answer because, and I quote, "We only hire predators, never prey." And they weren't sure how to quantify an otter because none of them had ever paid the least bit of attention to any sort of animal documentary or read biology or, visited a zoo recently. Story 115. I drove an hour away to an interview at 8 o'clock a.m. I waited outside the interviewer's office until 8:30 a.m. with no one to tell me where to go or where she was. Finally, another employee walks by and I ask if they know where this woman is to interview me. They had no idea where she was, why she was late, and told me if she wasn't there yet, I should leave because she probably forgot, okay? I decide 45 minutes is the cutoff, especially standing in a government building looking like a creep waiting. 8:45 on the dot, she rushes in flustered, wet hair, and in casual yoga pants. With all the resurgence of patience I could muster, I greeted her and was met with a passive-aggressive scolding of how the interview was at 9, not 8. I triple-checked the email asking me to interview and it was 8. We had conducted a phone interview and she followed up with an email request to an in-person interview at 8. I was 100% positive on this. I hate being late. Even with this, and I did say, "I'm certain you said 8 a.m., ma'am." She wasn't having it. Conversely, she also went on about why she was late, surmounting in, she went to the gym and forgot her underwear to change into and had to stop at a store and buy new ones after working out before coming to work. She told me this in the first 5 minutes. Why, I didn't ask her. Regardless, she looks at my resume, apparently for the first time, because she proceeds to tell me how it is unimpressive and my graduate studies should have yielded numerous publications after 1.5 years. In my field, most don't publish until after 3-4 years. Even still, she kept saying how I had moved up the interview time, showed me the workspaces, and told me I probably wouldn't be interested in what they do there. I politely told her I had driven at her request to be there and interview for employment. I was very interested. She waved me off. As we left, I just tried to hold it together. I was very poor and very desperate for a job. Thanked her, and she told me how great it is to work for the government, how good the benefits, the pension, the time off are, on and on. She said, if you can find an opening working for the government, you should try to check it out and get hired on. Hold up. I just looked her in the face and said, yes, ma'am, that was my hope with today's interview. Thank you. And left and sat in my car and bawled the whole drive home like the desperate loser I was. That was a low one, to be sure. Story 116, company was downsizing. All employees in a specific yet exclusive division were fired and ordered to reapply for their position, plus 2 other jobs in the company. You'd either get one of those jobs or be terminated. The subsequent interviews were conducted with a manager and an HR person. First interview in executive suite. Manager asked, why aren't you applying for this key supervisory slot? I had listed it second on my list. Me, I would prefer to stay in my expertise in which I won a national award. HR, I didn't know awards like that existed. Second interview. Current boss likes me for my existing OM, for which I was heavily recruited from another company. HR, wow, so you're the guy who does this job? I had no idea a real person did it. Third interview, HR person says he's never heard of my division or that employees actually worked at night. I had listed this job in which I merely served as a minor manager as third on my preferences. Really didn't want it, but had to list 3. The results, I was retained but transferred to the third dead-end day job. My old award-winning job was given to an aging staffer who never worked in that position or had a clue. The supervisor job went to a brilliant colleague who wanted and deserved it. I quit very soon thereafter and joined a bigger company with better benefits. Skill pays off. After all that, my old company, seeing the error of its ways and lost production and general lack of ability, offered me a bonus to return. Nope. And I'm returning the corporate knife you stuck in my back. Story 170. This was quite a while ago, maybe about 2010, and the recession was still hitting the job market pretty badly. Here I am, graduated from college a few years before, and looking for anything. I interviewed for a job calling people trying to recruit them for 2-year college. I think it was National American University. I had experience with customer service and some phone work doing tech support at my college, and this would be within my abilities. About halfway through the interview, I could tell it was going poorly. The guy interviewing me was asking me to give a sales pitch on recruiting, and I was failing. We got to the end, and he was upfront about saying I wouldn't be a good fit for what they needed. However, he did give me a bunch of great advice on how to properly interview and to be able to sell myself to a prospective employer. He even did a little coaching session with me. I knew he could see I was desperate, and I was unemployed, and he took time to help me out for my future attempts. I did take his advice and was able to get a decent job eventually. I have always used the tips he gave me, and they have helped me greatly. So to that guy, thanks. Story 118. The first question they asked was a statistics exam type question. Took me completely off guard. I half-assed the answer. A complete answer would have taken half an hour. The next question was about a Punnett square analysis. I answered honestly and said that the first thing I would do would be to look it up. Errors in Punnett squares are incredibly common, and I wouldn't trust anyone who said they could do it off the top of their head. I'd look it up even if I'd done one last week. They really didn't like that answer. They wanted to know where my husband worked and where we lived, and they concluded that our 6-month rental location was completely incompatible with the commute to their location. The whole thing was just super weird. It was like they sat down determined to find a reason they should not hire me. I was relieved to get out of there. Edit, brain fart. My apologies. Latin square, not Punnett square. Too much time spent quizzing my kid before his bio test. Story 119. A marketing internship the summer before my senior year of college. I remember showing the job description to my dad, and he told me it was going to be door-to-door sales. I didn't really believe him, and I showed up at 9 a.m. for the interview. Right away, I knew Dad was right about it not being a true marketing internship. There were 5 other applicants also waiting in the lobby with me, all for the same position. Behind a closed door, we could hear people shouting and laughing, and the receptionist explained that they liked to have fun, and this was their Tuesday morning trivia game. While the employees were playing their game, the receptionist made small talk for over half an hour. I'm wondering why they dragged us in at 9 if they knew no one would be able to interview us then. Finally, trivia ends, and it's time for us to get paired up with a current employee to shadow for the day. This was not explained beforehand and not what I would consider an interview. After all the other applicants are paired up and leave to do door-to-door sales or whatever, I'm told my person wasn't there that day. Now I'm really annoyed about 1, being lied to about the interview process, and 2, the fact that they attempt to reschedule me when they knew my person wasn't going to be there. The receptionist takes me into another room to show me a diagram of the company structure that is a pyramid and tell me that pay is commission-based. I leave and am relieved a week later when I'm told I didn't get the job. Story 120. Many years ago, I was interviewed for an IT director position at a finance and legal consulting firm. Apparently, they were expecting an older-looking person and assumed I was there for the temp admin positions. I was given a reading comprehension test, a typing test, and a spatial awareness/IQ test. These took a bit over an hour in total. When I was done, the guy said, "Okay, thanks, we'll call you." I asked about speaking to the CIO and other tech directors for the IT director position. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. They kept me waiting for about 25 more minutes, realizing the mistake, scrambling to pull things together. After 45 minutes of waiting, I told them I was going to leave. The headhunter called me right away, really upset that their mistake may cost her a commission on finding me and wasting my time. We had a very nice discussion about how she needed to brief her clients better and how they made several bad assumptions that could be an HR issue within the HR depth of the consulting firm. I never worked with her again. No idea if they ever found a new IT director. I feel like I dodged a bullet in a potentially disorganized, toxic workplace. I did learn that at the time, I was typing 80+ WPM mistake-free. This is a classic example of how a company's own disorganization can save a candidate from a toxic work environment. Being mistaken for an admin and forced through tests that have nothing to do with your actual role is a clear sign of what's to come. It's a good reminder that interviews are a two-way street, and sometimes the biggest win is realizing you've dodged a bullet.